March 11th, 2023. It's a normal Saturday morning at the airport, busy but not too busy. I'm working my usual 3:30 a.m. to noon shift at the airline, nearing the end of my shift, when at 9:03, I get a text from my mom. Tu abuelo se fue, she said. Your abuelo is gone. My mom had flown out to El Salvador a few days prior because my abuelo's health had been declining for some time. And while my relationship with him wasn't the strongest, especially after I started transitioning, the news of this loss still hurt me deeply. The rest of the day was a blur. I reluctantly left work early, frantically packed a bag, and got on the next flight out. I stepped off the plane at El Salvador and was immediately greeted by the familiar blast of humid heat, carrying with it the scent of the memories of all the times I visited in the past. I luckily got to my family's house just before the funeral procession and was greeted by family members that I hadn't seen in forever. I made my way through the crowd, trying to find familiar faces while trying to avoid awkward small talk, and I found my abuelo in the casket. No longer the strong man I remember, who would chop up a coconut for me or sing a beautiful song in the mornings. Instead, a man whose battle with diabetes ended up with him weakened and frail until his last moments. Before I knew it, we started making our way down to the church in the town center for the funeral mass. I was reunited with my siblings, who I hadn't seen in months, that felt like decades since they had moved out of my parents' house years before. I had imagined what our reunion would be like, especially since my siblings hadn't spoken to each other since the pandemic. I imagined an awkward, cold wave at each other, or that they'd simply ignore each other. Instead, they immediately scooped me up into a group hug and told me how much they missed me. Their arguments set aside, they had become once again the siblings I grew up with. Argumentative, of course, but nevertheless loving towards me and each other. I looked around the crowd, and I noticed that the same pattern was happening with other people. Tias and tios who bickered with each other constantly held each other, and the fights over terrenos and political issues had been forgotten. After the service, on the way to the burial, I heard people exchanging stories about the kind of man my abuelo was. A man who put others before himself, who would protect his family at all costs, and a good friend to all. And of course, everyone remembered his beautiful singing voice. Everyone seemed to remember being woken up by Don Miguel's songs, usually love songs dedicated to my abuela. Now in his absence, we raised our voices and sung those same songs as we laid him to rest. I remember a quote from the show, One Day at a Time, the Netflix reboot, not the original. Penelope and her cousin, Estrella, reunited once again after a childhood dispute, are practicing their childhood dance at their tia's funeral. Estrella turns to Penelope and asks, "Is it weird that we're dancing at a funeral?" To which Penelope responds, "It's a Latino funeral. It'd be weird if we weren't dancing." Now, I don't know about the Latina community in general. That's a lot of cultural differences between countries. But I know for sure Penelope's statement rang true for my family. I mean, my abuelo loved to sing. It'd be weird if while celebrating the life he lived, we were not singing as well.